Well, Matt and I joined Sundays, well, probably around 70, 71, and there were about maybe 30 members at the time. And Joe Delaney was the steward, and he was the only staff member that I ever saw around. And he addressed us all in a very formal manner. And of course, there were no men and women in those days. We were all ladies and gentlemen. And I remember it must have been sort of springtime when I came first. And I remember going to the bar, fire was lighting, there were armchairs around. We were sitting in the armchairs. It was so cozy and so intimate. And that was my first impression. There was a partition so that the snooker door was cut off from the bar, so the gentlemen who were only going to the snooker at that time could get into the snooker room without having to go through the bar. So it was very much a gentleman's club, and all these mature gentlemen, we thought they were very mature in those days because we were very young, and they would just quietly go into the snooker room and give us a sideways glance as if really we shouldn't be there as women or as ladies. The reading room was a very quiet space. All of the newspapers were laid out, plus magazines and a pack of cards, chess set. So that was the quiet place where people went in to play their game of cards or their game of bridge or their chess game. And of course, there was a poker school at one stage, which eventually was banned because it got out of hand. So that was my memory of the reading room. We had grass courts, and of course play was only available mostly in the summer, although there were two clay courts which we played on towards the evening, but no lights such. And I remember the tape, the lines on the clay courts were tapes, and they were sort of pinned down. And of course, they were all cracked, so you could fall over the tapes as you were serving or running to get to the net. The change room was upstairs where the office is now. One shower with steps down into it, and it was quite dangerous actually, but we all survived. Squash was great because we couldn't play tennis in the winter, and the squash courts had been built before we joined, so the squash kept us going. And every evening after the games, the bar was full, there was sociability, we were all drinking and driving, no problems whatever. Mostly I remember husbands and wives. I remember John and Deirdre Keneally, Kay and Ken Stanton, Jim and Brenda O'Donoghue, and we played a lot of mixed tennis during the day. At one stage then, Matt brought his canoe down. He said, we are a tennis and boating club, so he decided he'd do a little bit of boating. So he brought the canoe down and put it on the river, and himself and a few people used to go up the river every so often. And he tells stories about being attacked by a swarm of swans swooping down over them as they came down towards the bridge near the Mercy Hospital. And then I remember one open week, he decided to take some of the ladies out of the canoe, just one at a time, because it was a two-man canoe. And of course, so they got into the canoe, and then there was a little rat sighted, so you can imagine the screaming and kerfuffling. And Matt said, sit down, you can't stand up in the canoe. The ladies shouting, let me out of the canoe, I want to go back in. So it was great fun, and open week was so much fun, and usually the captain's wife organised all the catering. I mean, there were no staff as such, so the catering was done. The ladies made the desserts, and the captain's wife got her team together and got the cooking done and served up sitting down meals each evening after play. And then Joe Delaney retired, and by the way, the fire was lighting every evening, and that was lovely. And then after a couple of years, the fire was disposed of, I suppose, for safety reasons, and a gas fire was put in. So that stayed there for a few years then until they decided to get rid of the fireplace altogether. And then 1973, Matt and I decided, or Matt was going abroad to study, so we were going away for the year 73, and all the members gave us a presentation of Waterford Lass, even though we were coming back a year later. So there was a great generosity and great club spirit around that. I remember when Matt was captain, I particularly remember there was very little tennis because it poured rain the whole week, even though it was the middle of June. And then he decided to start a closed week. So that took off from there and became very popular. And it meant all the members met each other and played with each other. And it's been going on since, as far as I know, gone from strength to strength. And then the veterans teams came up and we were all playing against each other to try and get on the veterans. And that became a very popular event. And then all the other clubs started and it went on from there. And of course then the interprovincial started. And the first one, I think the first one might have been on Sunday as well. First interprovincial. Well, I remember also when the Davis Cup was played here. And I remember the professionals and they put seating up and it was a very exciting time. Well, as well as that, we had coaching. Jo Jury and her trainer and her team came over to give us coaching. And we all went out on court and the trainer came and Jo Jury came and gave us tips on where we should stand and how we should hold the racket and how we should move from side to side. So it was a very exciting time as well.
How many active members would there have been?
Oh, 30 or 40. And most of them were older men. I remember Mr. Guy, particularly, and a lot of the businessmen in town, and of course their wives never came. Oh, and also on Christmas Day, the bar was open. The gentleman came down. The steward was on his holidays. The gentleman came down and ran the bar for the few people who came in. And then while their wives were cooking the dinner, you see, they came down here for their little drinks and then went home for their Christmas dinner. So it was very civilized and very old-fashioned. New Year's Eve was a lovely night. We all went out to different places for dinner in groups. And then everybody came back to Sunday as well about 11 o'clock. And we brought in the New Year Sunday as well. And I remember one particular New Year's Eve, snow was on the ground and we all went out on the course and we were singing Old Lang Syne. So it was lovely.
Tell me about your tennis racket.
Well, this is the famous timber racket, Max Forge, that we all played with and did fine until the lighter ones came in.
That looks
well. Oh, also we played with white balls. There were no yellow balls in those days.
Yeah, that looks well used.
It is, yes, indeed.
Any other memories going forward? What are the biggest changes in the club?
Oh, the biggest change, the number of staff, and of course the courts. There were 6 grass courts when we joined, and 2 clay courts in the middle. So and then the changing room at times we used to have to go down to the steward's house to change, and of course the change room up where the office is now was the one that we mostly used. And gradually then the membership increased, and then eventually I remember a vote when Matt was captain. A vote. There was an EGM, and the members voted to whether to let ladies be members, but it was narrowly defeated. So it was another couple of years then before that was brought up again. And of course, there were no ladies allowed in the snooker room. And then eventually, when the snooker room became available, no ladies went in there anyway. So it was kind of funny.
When did coaches appear on Sundays?
There were no coaches in those days. Oh, I should talk about Jim O'Neill. Jim O'Neill, who was a very avid tennis player, Dr. Jim O'Neill, whose daughter, Eva, still plays here. And I remember him out on court with all the young people, pouring sweat, and coaching and coaching and coaching for no reward, except that he loved the tennis and he loved to promote it. So he was fantastic. And he was the coach for the young people until Greg Morris came, and I don't remember what year he came. Great.
Was it considered quite an exclusive place back then?
Yes, and they were always vying with Rushbrook. But, yeah, you see, you had to be nominated. It wasn't that easy to become a member. You had to be nominated. You had to know someone who knew somebody else before you got in. But then they were looking for members too, because the club was diminishing. And it's only for the squash courts the whole thing would have collapsed. And now people wonder how anybody got planning permission for where the squash courts are built. Because the plan was to have a walkway all along there, and of course that was scuppered and they put in the squash courts. Also, there was a gentleman who lived across the water at the other side of the river, and he used to come across in his boat to the club, and the steward would meet him and help him to come in, and then he'd take his boat back home again. It was lovely.